Hey, how's it going everyone? It's Butchimus here from Unleash the Gamer, and today I'm going to be sharing with you all my spoiler-free thoughts and opinions on Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Now at this point in time I have completed 2 full playthroughs of the game, and Sekiro is already shaping up to be my favourite From Software game to date. And that's not really a statement to be taken lightly, considering I have hundreds if not thousands of hours spread across all their previous games in the Dark Souls series and Bloodborne. Also worth mentioning is that all video footage that I will be using today will be from the early game, because I don't want to spoil this for anyone, because this video might be a deciding factor for someone who's on the fence whether they should buy Sekiro or not. So one of the first things that I want to touch on that I feel like really sets Sekiro ahead of From Software's previous titles is its combat system. The combat just feels so fresh and rewarding, and it works so well in the boss fights specifically. And one thing about the Souls series is that I always felt like their boss fights versus like another humanoid with a sword, the kind of dual type bosses, were always their strongest boss fights. And Sekiro is just plentiful with these types of boss encounters, and it just feels so much better with Sekiro's combat system. It truly feels like a clashing of swords duel. Whereas in Dark Souls you kind of just hang back a little bit and let the boss finish out their combos and moves, and then you go in and counter whenever you see an opening. And after spending so much time within the Souls series, I really started to grow fatigued of them, and one area specifically was the combat. The combat really started to show just how kind of shallow it was. So for Sekiro, I feel like the combat system is just leagues ahead of its predecessors, and it's one of the standout features for me why I really like this game. So I've probably already made one too many comparisons back to From Software's previous games, and shall be focusing on Sekiro more as a standalone game. But I think it's just important to include those footnotes for people who have played Souls or who have played Bloodborne and still are on the fence about getting Sekiro. And the next point I want to touch on is the difficulty, which is always an interesting topic to bring up with these games. And personally, I think Sekiro is just evenly balanced right there in the middle of the scale. It's not too hard and it's not too easy. Looking back at my first playthrough experience of Sekiro and stacking it up against my first playthrough experience of previous FromSoft games, I would put Sekiro in the easier bracket. Now that doesn't mean that it's an easy game or an easier game, because that's all very subjective, but for me, being able to fully utilize the combat system, I found the game an easier experience. You're not the underdog this time, you're not a struggler. You're very much on even footing with all your enemies that you encounter. You start out this game already as a master shinobi, you are already a skilled swordsman. It's not like previous games where you start out as an absolute nobody who happens to take upon this burden and just struggles from the get-go onward. As I said earlier how I found my first playthrough experience easier because I fully utilized the combat system, it does not mean that the combat system is easy. Most combat situations really require some quick inputs and precise timings on the player's behalf, and this really rings true in boss encounters. There's been moments where it's late and I'm tired and I'm going into a boss fight that I've done plenty of times before. I know the moveset off by heart, I know what to punish, what not to punish, and still I make one mistake and I will get destroyed, because that's all it takes in most cases. So while you can end a lot of boss encounters quite quickly if you bring your A game and you're hitting every perfect deflect and you're just punishing the boss as they should be, sometimes it can only take one bad deflect timing mistake for a boss to capitalize on it and put you in a hole in the ground. I personally didn't really hit any hard walls when it came to the bosses with this game, and I got most of them within my first 5 tries or so. But the boss encounters do definitely ramp up in difficulty towards the end, and the ending boss itself was quite a challenge. However, there was one boss encounter that was absolutely miserable for me. It took me a good 2 hours or so to finally complete it, but thankfully it is an optional side boss. You don't have to do it to progress the story. You will get some nice lore tidbits out of it, but other than that it's completely optional. And on future playthroughs, I don't think I'm ever going to do it again. This boss fight is really, it's a very Dark Souls-y boss, and it's very counterintuitive to the combat systems of Sekiro. I would recommend people do it at least once just for the experience to see how different this game is to Dark Souls, But yeah, other than that, I'm never touching that boss ever again. In saying that, I do think From Software really brought their A game with the bosses and mini boss encounters in this game, and personally I think this might be the greatest cast of bosses that they've ever had in any of their games. The final points that I want to briefly touch on, because this is spoiler free after all, will be the world of Sekiro, its story and its lore. Now obviously I can't go too deep into any of these points because they are the most spoiler heavy aspects of most games. I'm not going to talk about the story at all, other than say that I do like it and that there are multiple paths and endings you can take towards the end of it. How I like the story stacked up against some of From Software's previous titles is going to take me a bit more time to digest, but as it stands I do like the story. The story is also told in a much more direct approach, and it focuses heavily around the character and his actions, who is also now a fixed protagonist and not a character created by the players. Personally, I like this approach and I found it quite refreshing, and even though I loved piecing together the story of Dark Souls and figuring out its mysteries, it was just refreshing to just have a story kind of just more plainly told to you this time around. And that's not to say that the lore and mystery of Sekiro has been completely removed and nullified. It's definitely still there, but it kind of focuses heavily more on NPCs and bosses, more so than the actual world of Ashina itself. Speaking of Ashina, which is the location that Sekiro is set in, I really love the diversity of the areas and the level of exploration that the game offers. Most of the areas have a very saturated color palette and are filled with ambient music, which I feel like just really adds to the mystical atmosphere of this game. Honestly, I could just go on for the next 20 minutes singing this game's praises and probably sounding like the world's biggest fanboy, but as a massive fan of From Software games, I feel like they started to fall into a rut of repetitiveness and their games just started to get a bit more predictable. Sekiro, however, for me anyways, just reinvented everything that I started to grow tired of within From Software's games, to the point where I feel like this is such a strong single player experience that I don't even care that they removed co-op and multiplayer. And honestly, if this is the standard of a single player game that From Software can create while not having to focus on the multiplayer aspects, I would not care if they announced next week that their next game will also be strictly a single player experience. Sekiro for me, however, was more than just a new game with a strong single player. It was also a breath of fresh air from a developer whose games that I love, but eventually would grow tired of the formula and over time just slowly stop playing them. So I am curious to hear your thoughts and opinions on Sekiro, and also maybe if you didn't buy the game and are on the fence, if this video helped you out in any way, shape or form, so let us know in the comment section below. And as always, all Unleash the Gamer social media links will be in the description box below. If you like Sekiro content, then please consider subscribing to stay updated for all future videos. It was a pleasure to share my opinions with all of you today. My name is Butchimus, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.